Welcome to Within WordPress, your favorite podcast. I hope. My God, should I still be saying this? I hope. In this episode, I welcome Felix Arntz. Felix, welcome.
Hey, thanks for having me.
Yeah, I'm very happy to have you. You are touching a topic in the world of WordPress that is very near and dear to my heart on, I would say, almost a daily basis. And you can correct me if that turns out to be once a week. But yeah, so please, for those who are not aware of who you are, what you do, can you please introduce yourself?
I am Felix Arntz. I am a WordPress core committer. I have been contributing to WordPress core for good 9 years now. And I am also a senior software engineer at Google. So I work at Google in basically a WordPress focused team. So we contribute directly to WordPress and related initiatives, primarily to improve performance. And I've been at Google for about 6 years now. And while the team has gone through some shifts, I've basically been working on WordPress my entire time at Google.
Related initiatives, you say. What does that mean?
I mean, I guess I said initially that I'm a WordPress core committer or core contributor.
Yep.
But our team also works with other WordPress projects. So we don't only contribute to WordPress core. We also work with other big, like, popular plugins. We partner with them or try to consult with them to land certain performance features in their plugins. But we also occasionally work on other CMSs. So our team is generally, I would say, a CMS focused team, but because scale and like large scale performance improvements matter, WordPress is by far the most powerful lever in that regard because of its market share.
Yeah, for sure. Interesting. When you say you're collaborating with other plugins, performance plugins out there, does that literally mean here's new features that are available to you, either in the browser or as a tool, a mechanism, and you're not yet using it? How about we talk about how to integrate that? Is that the sort of collaboration I'm looking at, or?
Yeah, sometimes. I mean, we sometimes advocate for new browser features that are good for performance to get those adopted in performance plugins. But we also sometimes work with other plugins that are not necessarily focused on performance. But every plugin more or less has some performance impact, and
Yeah.
and especially when we talk about extremely popular plugins like those with over 1 million installs.
Yep.
There we have those plugins have a large impact on the web, not even only WordPress, but even the web. And so we sometimes find opportunities to improve those plugins, and then we reach out to the developers of them.
I like how you frame that. You find opportunities. I'm translating that as in you're looking at plugins that have a high impact on the web, and if and when and where they can improve on in performance, and they're not doing it just yet, you come with a friendly nudge.
Yeah, and sometimes plugins are already like focusing on performance, on improving their performance. So, and then that's great for us. So we can only be like, hey, here's this other feature that you could be looking at. Other times, maybe the plugin developers have not been yet as focused on performance. So then it's a little more advocacy side for performance.
Yeah, that's interesting. I didn't know that. So what I know about the Google team is you have stewardship over the what's the
Performance lab.
the performance lab, and you have the Sidekit plugin, or is that even
right?
Is that a different?
So we have been working on that. So Sidekit was my personal primary project for my first 3 years at Google.
Yeah.
Pretty much. and since then I've shifted gears a little bit more towards the performance work. So it's been over 3 years now that we started establishing the WordPress performance team,
Yeah,
and
it's been a good 3 years.
yeah,
Yeah.
I can't believe it's that long actually.
No, I was
So
still calculating in my head when you said I've been here for 6 years, and I'm like, was it 6 years ago that we were actually colleagues at Yoast? Was that 6 years or was that 7 years? How,
yeah,
I'm lost in the math
yeah,
real fast one. But I didn't have
yeah.
6 years in my head. No, but interesting. So the two plugins out there currently, uh, sort of under the management of or I don't know, is it management? But the things that you focus on are the Performance Lab plugin and the Sitekit. So Sitekit is a little bit less, I hear you say, for you personally, but I gather the team is still uh, on that as it should. Um,
Right.
I'm mostly curious, as you know, my day to day tasks mostly focus around performance in one way or another. I'm very curious on the things you do for the Performance Labs plugin. Can you tell me a little bit more of what because that result is the result of the WordPress core performance team? Did I say those words in the right sequence? I always
We call it, I don't know, sometimes it is the WordPress core performance team, sometimes it's just the WordPress performance team because we don't only focus on core, but yeah.
yeah. So there's more people working on the Performance Labs plugin. But I'm very curious, like, how do you find new ideas and focus of area of focus, where you go like, so this is what we're going to build next, and this is how we're not doing this, and maybe later that. How does that work?
Yeah. I mean, for just some additional context, like I'm sure you're aware of that, but like the Performance Lab plugin is, we are heavily involved in it, but it is basically a WordPress community plugin. So while the WordPress performance team, like our Google team is a big part of it, we're not solely driving it.
Yeah,
That's different for Sitekit, which is basically a Google product. Um, so yeah, for Performance Lab, I think the way we went about it in the beginning was that we used there are those really big data sets out there of websites and their performance data. Like there's, for example, a Chrome user experience report, short
yeah,
Crux, which is based on data from Chrome users that opt into the anonymous tracking feature. Based on that, the Crux report makes um, data aggregated data for popular websites available publicly, so like in terms of performance. So
hmm,
performance data, when, for example, you can look for any popular website, you can look up in the Crux report how good is that site's LCP passing rate or INP passing rate.
yeah,
Um, and we use that, and based on that, there's another data set called HTTP Archive, which is also a public data set, which takes the domains from that Crux report and then runs a bunch of automated testing over them. So
yeah,
we're talking like millions of URLs every month, um, where they run, for example, Lighthouse, they run web page tests, and that alone, those two alone, they give so much data about those um, those domains. So, for example, then you can query HTML response bodies, which features they use, for instance. Or it also runs. They also run HTTP Archive also runs Webalizer, which is this technology detection framework, so that we can we can detect which sites are using WordPress, and then we can connect
yeah,
it back to Crux data and say, okay, now I want to get the performance only for WordPress sites. That's basically the main data set that we as a team look at, like the part of the Crux report that is WordPress sites, and
yeah.
then we try to validate the projects that we work on, their impact also on, more granularly. For example, we can use HTTP Archive to even segment which sites use I don't know, lazy loading or whatever feature. And
So
going back to your initial question, sorry, going back
Yeah,
to the initial question, we did initially look at HTTP Archive to kind of to see what are the most commonly reported problems by Lighthouse across WordPress sites. And then from there, we went to, okay, how can we tackle those?
yeah.
That gave us a sense of priority.
I think that makes sense. So you're combining two huge data collecting initiatives, Crux and HTTP Archive, and sort of mixing them to produce the valuable insight of which one does do a particular thing as well as not meet certain criteria, and what are things that we can do in core to basically fix the delta between the two.
Exactly. Yeah. And it helps. So it helps find which are the most which are the largest problems at scale.
Yep.
But it also later helps, once we have hopefully landed something in WordPress core, for instance, it helps to see how much does it actually improve the performance in the
That was
field.
my next question, because once you've identified it, then found a fix for it, then implemented it, and once it reaches implemented in the Performance Labs plugin, and then promotes from there to WordPress core. I'm assuming, and I kind of know the answer to this already, but for those listening, I'm assuming there is a moment where you say, hey, look, we've implemented this, and this is the actual effect of that on the web. Because you're running reports, right, for all the new versions of WordPress.
Right. Yeah, we do it. Yeah, we do assess for every WordPress release how
Yes.
assess. Sorry.
Oh, yes, yeah. Sorry, yeah. That's a fun.
We do assess for every WordPress version that gets out there. How does it impact performance
Yeah.
in the field? And but additionally, we do it for certain high priority features that we worked on. We try to do it more granularly, and that's always tricky, because the Crux report, it only gives one set of numbers for every month. So it's this data is influenced by many things, and you can't just boil it down to one feature before and after. That's impossible. But because the data set is so large, we can do our best to segment it based on certain feature detection at HTTP Archive in a way that we try to get as close as possible to some sort of, here's the sites that didn't have this feature in the last month, and here's the same sites that have the feature enabled the month after, and then we can compare them, for instance.
So there is a limitation there, because if you're only looking at a month worth of data, and let's say we have a high impact site on WordPress, millions and millions of page views per month, but the it lasts a little bit longer than a month before it's upgraded to a new major version of WordPress. Would you be missing that, or because if December 1st the new major release is done and you're measuring the whole of December, but it's 15th of January before updating to WordPress 6.7, would you miss what the impact was on that site, or is there a way to sort of still catch that?
Yeah, it is tricky, because I mean, the HTTP Archive does have which version of WordPress the site uses,
Yeah.
so that does detect. But to your point, we don't know when in the month the site updated.
Yeah.
Yeah, so if I believe HTTP Archive usually runs its pipeline somewhere between the 20th and the 30th of each month. And so then if the site updated like a day before the pipeline run,
Yeah.
it will show up as it is on the latest version, or it might update a day later, which is not that different, speaking of about the whole month length, but it would show up as the lower version. And those kind of things are the kind of inaccuracies that we can't avoid with those data sets. But I think looking at the data at scale still gives a good idea, because we look at so many URLs that it kind of, there is some noise, but
yeah, exactly. That's the word I was going for. So how much noise is there, or incomplete information when you're measuring like that? Because if it's in one
right.
month, it has a high impact. there's a fix implemented, yet the fix isn't measurable until 5-6 weeks later. Can you still actually accurately measure what you intended to fix? This is probably a very niche way of looking at data sets, but as you were explaining, that's apparently where my head went. So
Yeah, that's also what we're trying to do. I mean, this is this is an endless challenge that we've been
yeah,
trying to improve for years. And so when I say the thing with those inaccuracies is, fortunately, they're only present in when it comes to the actual performance metrics, which is in the end what we're after. We want to improve LCP and INP and CLS of WordPress sites. So for that we have the inaccuracies, but we have, for many features, you can come up with a metric that's far more specific to that feature. So let me make an example here. So there we WordPress core has lazy loading and adds fetch priority high to what WordPress core thinks is the high priority image. But that approach is limited because WordPress core does this from the server side, so it can only kind of guess what is probably the most important image.
yeah,
So we're currently working on a plugin that detects that on the client side and then optimizes subsequent responses. And for this kind of plugin, if this were to land in WordPress core, or even right now with the plugin, based on the plugin itself, we could look at to what percentage is the LCP image correctly detected. And let's say,
yeah,
for example, WordPress core detects it correctly in like 60% of cases, and then you install this plugin and now it's detected correctly in 95% of cases. Like, that would be a great outcome. And that would be a reliable,
yeah.
it would be a reliable assessment that the feature works as we intend to. And then from there, the LCP impact that actually brings for that, we can only go with a sort of approximate metric that we talked about.
Yep.
But at least still, we know for sure, if we get this kind of metric, we know for sure the feature is doing what it's supposed to do.
That's, I mean, my assumption has always been that in some way you would be looking at it as data driven as humanly possible. But it's actually quite nice to hear that how the team approaches the problems that need to be solved and how they're measuring the efficacy of what it is you intended to solve. Does your you working at Google, does that help in this particular case, or is it you could have been working anywhere else and you'd have the same set of data, or how does that work?
I mean, I would say it mostly helps because I have the people that work on this stuff are my colleagues, so I can easily ask them. I can easily find the right people to ask for how do I do this? How do I query that? So that helps a lot. But the data sets themselves, they are public, so we don't query data
Yep.
that's not public, basically. So yeah. But the other thing is, I mean, the thing is that those data sets are very big, so if you query them a lot for very complex things, you unfortunately incur quite a bit of cost on your, because you have, like, it's using BigQuery, so it's a paid
Yep.
service. So that's but the data is public and anybody could query it.
Yeah, BigQuery is a wonderful help in these types of things. For those listening, if you've never looked at what BigQuery can solve, it's it's a it's a tool. Well, I think the name is exactly what it is. You throw a lot of data at it, like a lot of data, and you have a whole tool set that allows you not only query but make reports and all types of wonderful things. Not every not every web project's going to need it, but to have BigQuery, um, yeah, definitely check it out. So, but that's
Yeah.
interesting
And
to learn. Yeah,
I mean, one thing I want to add is, for even if you cannot or do not want to query BigQuery yourself, the Crux report, for example, there is a public some like aggregation report that's called cwvtech.report. If you enter that in your browser, you basically see I would say, a high-level view of the types of things that we try to query. So this report has segmentation for all kinds of web technologies and how their performance is and how it has evolved over the years.
Would you say it's the information that you have in there is better than build with?
Um, I mean, I'm not quite sure at the moment. I haven't looked at build with in a long time, to be fair. But I don't know. I can't really make up my opinion about this right now. But I mean, I want to say there is different. There's also the other data set where like W3 text is the one that's very often
Yep.
referenced for
Yep.
WordPress adoption specifically. And I mean, though the HTTP archive data set provides a slightly different adoption rate of CMSs than W3 text does.
Yep.
I don't know which one of them is truly more accurate. One thing I can say is that HTTP archive has I think it has maybe like 17 million or 18 million websites in total. So obviously that's not the entire web. That's still only like I don't know. My personal website is unfortunately not popular enough to be in there. So
Yep. Yeah.
so
Mine either, sadly.
it's not the entire web, obviously.
No.
I don't know if W3 Text somehow has a larger data set, or if they I mean the thing was that it's not entirely public how they get to their data. So I don't know. I can't
Well,
say if that's better or more or less accurate than what HTTP archive says.
the reason I'm asking is, the general curiosity of how we're measuring and how we know what we say to be accurate is always the question in terms of looking at these types of performance things and the percentages that you think you should gain and what the actual impact is. Having worked with statistics myself a lot when I wore a younger man's clothes, uh, there's always a curiosity. Okay, well, how are we actually measuring, right? So statistics is a wonderful field where you can deep dive just on statistics alone and what you can present, and they don't necessarily have to correlate with the thing that you actually are showing. So
Right.
I've heard some stuff about build with that I go like, how accurate are we actually still with that tool? I think Yoast also on his CMS share kind of moved away from it, or might be remembering incorrectly. But anyway, so there's a whole bunch of features inside the Performance Labs plugin that are based off of things that you find. How is the adaptation going from the Performance Labs plugin into Core? Because I've seen some things have landed in there, but if I look at the current version, which is what today is December 3rd, there's a lot of features in there currently, plus the little sub plugins that do even extra things that you'd expect to. I mean, I expected to have landed in Core way sooner than the current timeline. How does that go? How do you decide which one goes, and what what do you think of that?
I mean, I think for once we always start with the features in the plugin to get some, well, first for once user feedback, but also the that we can measure the impact at least for the few sites in that HTTP archive and Crux dataset that use the respective plugins. There's obviously a lot less than WordPress, so it's not going to be entirely representative of the impact it will have in WordPress.
Yep.
But yeah, in terms of landing it in Core, one of the things that is really key when it comes to, for example, new web features is that they're somehow adopted either across browser or standardized in as part of the HTML spec. So that's a blocker for some of the things that are
Sure.
currently in the Performance Lab plugin, but not in Core. Other aspects, like like this this image prioritization engine that I briefly just mentioned.
Yeah.
that's a very extreme. It's an extremely powerful feature, but there are also some. It's also quite complex. So I think that is a simple. It's not simple. It's a it's a matter of
Yeah.
uh, it's a matter of getting enough core developers excited and on board about this. I think this is because it does certain things like run client-side JavaScript to detect things and then send it to the REST API, which um, I'm going to say like it's trying. I think we're doing our best there to address any potential like security concerns and
Yep.
traffic concerns. But I want to say like when a core developer hears public endpoint front end request, all alarm bells go off, and I think that's like for that particular plugin, that's something that will require
Yeah.
quite a bit of solid and thorough testing to make sure it's ready for core. If it like we hope that eventually it will be, but I think it's still that those plugins are still in a very early stage. And then there are other plugins like the modern image formats plugin, which I think, that we did try to get into core a while ago, but it was not. It ended up being rejected because of primarily that. I think primarily back then, the problem was that those modern image formats are not enough supported outside of the web, which I which which I agree, honestly. Like I don't like to agree, but like
Yeah.
there's still when you look at WebP and AVIF, a lot of the stuff like when it works great on the web, but then when you download it, you get screwed in many places where you try to use it, and that's
Yeah. That's
I
actually a good point.
I actually I don't necessarily personally agree with that being the reason not to land it, but that's kind of where we ended up, and
It's
so we kind of have to
interesting.
get back. At this point it's basically I would say a canonical plugin to use modern image
Yeah.
formats in WordPress. But if we wanted to land it in WordPress core, we would need to
But
come up with
it's
a solution for that problem. Like honestly, I think it should be. Part of me thinks this should be a browser thing that you can, if you right click an image and download it, that you don't get the modern image format, but you just get a JPEG. Because honestly,
yeah.
if you use offline images, it doesn't matter that it's fast or not. Like, JPEG
No,
is fast enough when you talk about offline.
the problem there, indeed, if you're trying to solve these types of issues, right, you're either fully dependent on a browser functionality to do this on the fly as you're download or as you're looking at a .webp. You go, let me download that, then have that automatically saved as a JPEG, not even asking. Because if you're introducing a dialogue, you're going to complicate it
Yeah,
even more.
yeah,
So you have to solve it on browser level, which is difficult in and of itself. Because if you
yeah.
got one, great, but there's a few more than one browsers. And then the other problem is if you don't want to solve it through the browser, your OS needs to support it, and that's probably even the more difficult route. Like Mac OS X needs to do it. Windows, whatever version it is on, Linux, probably the easier one. But
Right. So there's, either we can come up with, the good thing is in our position, at least, we being working at Google, people that work on Chrome are just around the corner. So
yeah.
we
Well,
can try to talk them into exploring something like that, at least in Chrome. And
would you
but
say
yeah, it
Chrome
is
or
indeed
Chromium?
difficult. Well,
Would you? I mean,
on either side, I guess.
because if you
Because
solve it in Chromium, you have a whole bunch of browsers now
right.
dependent on that. So that,
Yeah. I think it would be probably in Chromium
yeah,
because Chrome is built on top of it.
yeah, and so is Brave and Edge, and
Yeah.
quite a few others. No, but that certainly is a challenge. Like if you have, and the question in my head is still like, should that be the reason why it's not being implemented? You can argue that if you are implementing it, it's available, and for those downloading, finding themselves in like, hey, why doesn't this file work? That sort of creates the public demands it now. So hey, You could argue that WordPress has the obligation to have a positive effect on all things data consuming. Why not add it in so people are going to ask for a solution?
This
Yeah,
is the
maybe.
famous chicken and egg problem. We have
Yeah,
that with a lot of things. Also, when
yeah,
you talk
I
about
imagine.
this is a whole. Even when you speak about the whole actual web technologies and web standards that already exist,
Mm.
um, there's often the question, okay, like browser X does not support this feature, so
Should
someone
we?
says it should not land in WordPress because it's not supported in that browser. But then you could also argue we should land in WordPress because WordPress has such a big impact that then maybe the people who work on that browser will be like, okay, we should support this.
I
So
find myself leaning in that direction most of the time because I think if
right,
you have an influence such as WordPress has, you're kind of, yeah, you have. I think you have a responsibility to be the leading example, and this is a great thing because again, I see a whole bunch of features in the Performance Labs plugin and the auxiliary plugins to that, of which I go, well, the support for it is big enough. Why aren't we adding it? It's been in there for 3-4 months now. That's a long period. That's a
right,
full release. Um, and I get that certain features are very tough, like they're multifaceted, they're very complicated. There are many edge cases. I get all of that. Again, I've built software myself for various situations where you go like, oh, I thought it was working, but hey, I guess it wasn't, because here's another scenario I hadn't thought of. I'm fully aware of that, but like I said, yeah, I think we have a responsibility there. Um,
I, I mean, I think for what it's worth, I think WordPress has at least it has become better at that. I would say over the
yeah,
years that it
yeah.
does more of the progressive things. Like there are more. I feel like we have been landing more progressive enhancements in WordPress than we
Oh,
did
well,
10 years ago. Like I
let
think
me.
the policy used to be a lot stricter, and
Yeah,
Gutenberg is also pushing the boundaries a lot. I think of on your some modern technologies, and
yeah.
um, so I think it's a good development. But I completely agree with you that there should be even more.
Yeah. Oh, well, let me be very clear on, because the performance team, the impact, you know, you said it's been there for 3 years now. Um, the impact that has had on the actual performance of WordPress, on uh, so many different facets, in terms of not just performance labs experiments type of stuff, but also like, I just look at Johnny Harris's very thorough looking at queries and optimizing queries, and having this new query class that is then um, made at use at all these various aspects of queries that we're doing. I'm sure other people worked on it as well, but I talked to him about this, so which is why I'm mentioning him specifically. But that type of focus on all things WordPress, I think, is, 3 years may sound like, oh wow, it's a long time already, but in hindsight, that is way too short of a period to be focusing on performance. Um,
Right. Right.
Years back, there was somebody who did like the test that you are now doing from version 6.5 to 6.6 to 6.7, where you see how certain queries are being faster, or load times are faster, all these things. But somebody did, and this is probably 7-8 years ago, and I forgot who, but somebody did like the same thing for older versions of WordPress, and then going back, like, this is the download size, and these are the default theme, and how fast it loads, and all of these things. And you could see like an improvement, and then you saw a flattening, and then you saw a dive. Like, it got bloated. It bloated, wrong word probably, but it got slower. And
Mhm.
again, this is the thing. I think the responsibility that we have, and I couldn't be more of a fan of what you slash Google slash the performance team does in terms of just looking at the whole. Let's make this thing faster. Like,
Right. And I mean, I want to add to that. It's also at least sometimes it's let's not make it slower because sometimes I mean there's always new features coming in and those features have a
yeah,
cost
yeah, yeah,
and
yeah,
I think sometimes if it's a really big thing that's needed, yes, it has a cost, then let's just at least try to keep the cost of this feature as low as possible. maybe this release we will not improve performance, but we'll at least keep the status quo, even though this big feature is being added. That's also a way to look at it. So I sometimes I think that sometimes worth emphasizing when certain releases, even the ones where we were closely involved, they have slight regressions or they don't improve. Like, and I think that doesn't necessarily mean that, like, performance actually degraded in bad ways. Sometimes it's just, okay, here's this big feature and it had a cost and that's it.
It's a mix for sure. I kind of want to add to that. There is a part of me that finds, I mean, we're over optimizing as much as we can, right? So we're trying to find the things to do, which means scripts are loaded only where they are loaded. Scripts are being minimized as much as they can. Scripts are being loaded in a sequence, but done smartly. Images, same thing. You optimize as much as you can, where you can, whenever you can. You lazy load, so you only load what you need to load, and all of these things. And once we've produced a website like that, and let's say I produced it, and you visit that website, you get it in the most optimized version, perfect, and that's the goal, and that should be the goal. But if you then go to YouTube and start watching a video, I go like, okay, how many MBs was that? Like, so what did we actually save? There's that. This is something I'm wrestling with every now and then. Yes, we want to optimize, and I know YouTube, as the example I've used, optimizes the way video is being loaded and onto your machine, and only that which you're actually are going to watch. I get all of that, but watch YouTube for 30 minutes, and you've had hundreds of megabytes download to your machine, right? So it's sometimes a little bit difficult in my head, like, what are we actually solving if we're also seeing a huge increase in video across the board? YouTube is an example, but Instagram, TikTok.
Right. Yeah.
There's
I
a
mean,
lot
this
of
is a
data
tricky
going on right now.
problem. I mean, this is definitely a tricky problem. I guess when you talk about, when you look at it from a sustainability perspective, then yeah, then I guess we shouldn't be watching videos on the web. We
Yeah,
also probably we also, but from that perspective, it's very. I mean, it's hard to reason about it, because at the same time, then you could argue, well, we shouldn't be using images on websites because they're also by far the
yeah, I
worst
know.
thing that is on a website. I
Yeah,
mean, unless you have video on a website, which please don't.
it's even worse. Worse. No,
But
I mean,
yeah, like, I mean, I think in the end, I think in the end, what we're trying to do with performance is, I suppose, provide do find the most reasonable way to get sites performant given the resources that they want to display to their users.
yeah,
Um, and I think in the end, the goal is to have, I mean, better, yeah, have faster experiences for the end users. In
and
Yeah, but if your site is a video platform, you will have worse performance than a blog with
yes,
some text. Like, you can't fix that. Like, you can't work around that.
no. I mean, like I said, it's a weird thing that every now and then pops up in my head. Like, great, I
Yep.
optimized this, I saved that, and all great, and then the actual site that I worked on is linking to a lot of videos, is embedding a lot of videos. I go, yeah,
Yeah, that's a
great.
that's a bit uh yeah, it's a bit frustrating, I suppose. That makes
Yeah,
a lot of sense.
in a way, but I guess that's the chasm in which we have to work. Um, you the, you build a lot of plugins or work on a lot of plugins for the performance side of things as you're working at Google, but you very recently released a plugin that sort of highlights a very different type of interest. You have a plugin called AI Services, which I thought was a brilliant plugin. First thought I actually had when I saw it was like, wow, this should be in core.
Mhm.
For the simple reason because it solves a problem from a foundational level. But maybe explain a little bit how you came to figure this plugin, figure this one out. Oh, I need to build this, and maybe kind of walk us a little bit along how you look at AI as in the context of this particular plugin.
Yeah. I mean, as many people, I got curious about AI in recent years, and
It's kind of hard to miss.
I noticed, and I when I tried some WordPress plugins that do things with AI before I really got more into it technically myself.
Hmm.
And but what I basically noticed, like one thing that annoyed me is that more or less every WordPress plugin adopts a certain cloud provider service. Like, I mean, whether it's Gemini, OpenAI, or any other ones, like most plugins, they pick one and implement support for it. And what I really, I mean, that works. That's fine if you use like one AI plugin. And today, maybe there aren't that many in the WordPress ecosystem, but I think there's obviously lots of opportunities to use AI to help with content creation and even other things like maybe even performance, as I mentioned before. But what I want to say is, imagine a future where you have 10 AI plugins on your WordPress site, and one requires Anthropic, and one requires Google, and one requires OpenAI, and one requires Replicate or whatever. Like, and then you have to get subscriptions with all of those providers to use those features that don't necessarily need to use exactly that provider that the plugin author added support for. So
Yep.
it really puts the burden on end users, like we both both from a bad user experience perspective and financially, um, because they would have to pay all the different providers just to use certain features that they could in theory also use with just with one provider, for instance.
Yep.
That's one of the things that bugged me a lot, and then I kind of thought about it further. Like I think one of the reasons for that is that um, these providers have different APIs. They are not uniform, so it's a lot of work to implement support for multiple. What's even made worse, because a lot of those providers do not provide PHP SDKs, so you can't just use some code library in your plugin. You have to either find an open source community maintained one or build it yourself. And I've seen many plugins kind of currently do the latter, which then can lead to kind of poor quality solutions, because as a plugin owner that builds AI-based features, you do not want to build an AI client. You want to build AI features. So
Yep.
you want to get this done as fast as possible, basically. Um, and I think and I think in the end, again, going back to, because it's so tedious today to adopt AI in a plugin. Um, Most plugin owners go with probably whatever provider they use the most and don't consider others. And that in the end puts the burden on the end user. Let alone there's also the poor UI experience of having to paste API keys in tons of different plugin UIs.
Mm.
Like if you use, let's say if you have 10 plugins that use uh, Gemini, for instance, you should just have to paste this in one place, your API key, not in every single plugin's screen, the same API key.
Exactly. Yeah.
So I think that's why I came up with the idea that there should be some general infrastructure for AI. So basically, in a nutshell, the plugin I built is is providing an abstraction layer around AI services, so that you can talk to any AI service with one uniform API, so that as a plugin developer, you do not have to pick and choose. You can just say, okay, my feature
Whichever
would
you
work with
prefer.
any of those providers,
Yep.
and then the end user can choose.
Yeah. I like that. I really like that principle of yeah, just solving a headache, basically. So, first of all, I don't think anyone should ever have to copy paste API keys and secrets. I think you should want to build it in such a fashion that you can do that underwater, the exchange, which is what we did, for instance, for our Scanfully plugin for the SaaS version of it. So the only thing you have to do is install the plugin and then hit one button, and if you're logged into both, it just syncs, right? That's how smooth things should work. So I like that we've done that, and I like seeing that in other projects as well, where you want to say, not only am I solving the problem of what you just said, like the whichever AI you want to use shouldn't be relevant to how you solve the problem once you're inside WordPress, but also make it as frictionless as possible, because I think we, on the whole, see way too many people just not fully understanding the basics of what they're actually needing to do. And certainly, we may think AI has seen a high adaptation already, but if you look at it on the whole, I think we're just starting. Like literally, I think we're just starting to wrap our heads around implementations of AI, versatility of how to use AI on what level, in what degree, and all of those things. I think we're just starting to see how those things could be implemented. Is there a particular implementation of AI inside of WordPress where you are especially excited about?
Um, I mean, first, just to add to this, I even feel, I mean, we're definitely scratching the surface with what's possible with AI, but I think I think specifically in WordPress, there isn't even as much AI as in other industries, and I think partially that is owed to the difficulty that it is today to even get the foundation ready to use AI, which
Yep.
is that's not really using AI. That's just building an API client, which
Yeah.
I have to say, I love building APIs. So I love doing this kind of stuff, but I think a lot of people would find that boring and they rather want to build AI immediately. And that makes a lot of sense. Like you
Yeah.
want to build features based on AI. But yeah, going to your question, like I mean, I'm excited for definitely some assistance with like content creation. Like I think there's a lot of opportunity with AI to like suggest certain like outlines of posts, for instance, or
Yeah.
suggest categories based on the categories you have on the site which fit to the post that you just wrote,
Yeah.
or maybe even create new ones. I think, I think there's, I mean, I personally like a lot the idea of alt text generation for images. I know there's definitely
Yep.
varying takes on the quality of the output, which makes sense. But I
For
think
sure.
there's a big opportunity there because I think, I mean, if you're not like I think a lot of administrators of WordPress, still not necessarily aware that you have to put alt text for good accessibility on images. And my take is a little bit like, if the is it better to have like a slightly inaccurate text or not at all? I mean, this is maybe a controversial question, but like,
I think it's a very
and
valid question.
but I think if the user would completely forget it, then I'd rather. I think AI, from what my early explorations, I think it's at least reasonably enough, like the output that I've seen in most cases.
I think
Um,
this, for me, it's the Pareto principle. I very much see. I've played with a few tools like that. 80% is great. 20% is, and if we take the 80-20 as a base, even 70-30 would be fine for me, to just have something there versus not having anything there, because the
exactly.
goal is to be informative, right? For those who can't see the image, and to then somewhat accurate display, tell what the image is about. That's good enough for me. I like,
Right, and
yeah, go.
well, and I feel like they don't. I haven't come across many times where it said something completely different than what was in the image.
Exactly. Yeah.
That's obviously, at that point it's really not helpful. So then maybe not having nothing would be better. But I mean, I don't know. This is like, definitely a human will not be replaceable with AI, and I think we can all agree to that. And but I think in many cases it will do a better job than the user not adding anything.
I have, so this podcast will be transcribed in Descript, which is an app that we're also recording this in. It's an app that does a whole bunch of optimizing what is being said. There's too much to mention on the positive side of what this app can do. But one of the things that it now has, it has an AI integration called Underlord, which I absolutely love the name of. But the Underlord does a whole bunch of turning whatever we just said, turn it into a YouTube video description, including the markers for the chapters and all of that sort of stuff.
Oh, nice.
If you don't like the title, you can ask it to propose a different title. If you don't like the output or whatever, like there's I can't recite by heart right now what the options are, but there's tons of options it does with its Underlord AI. Those are exactly in the line of what I would love to see on the WordPress side of things. And I think I've only played with the generative side of AI inside of WordPress with Yoast SEO Pro Premium, where you can have your meta descriptions be suggested in 5 different versions, and you pick one of the 5. So you hit Use AI, you click it, and it presents you 5 options. Funnily enough, I 9 out of 10 times just pick number 2. I don't know why that is, but number 2 usually is the one that is most accurate for what I intend to have as a meta description. But those sort of things, to me, are my favorites, where it just makes sense for me not to do the manual labor side of things, if that makes sense. Generative, sure, but this is summarizing, knowing what I actually want, and then sort of play with it. In the case of Descript, there's a little bit of extra prompt that I can add to it, that sort of stuff. I see huge potential for AI on that side of things, but it can do so much more. What do you see in terms of it doing for coding and maybe even templating stuff and things of that nature? Have you played with that?
I mean, I haven't built anything like that myself so far, but I wanted to say for what you mentioned before, the you bring up a great point with the whole picking options.
Mhm.
From something that AI generated, I find this. I mean, this is super common. You would need to use this for, I don't know, rewriting paragraphs of what you just wrote, or
Yeah,
generating
yeah,
titles, generating meta descriptions, generating tags, or anything like that.
yeah,
And that's something I've thought about a lot. Like I don't know, as a like a meta thing, I would love to see some, I don't know, some JavaScript or web component that implements the picker kind of UI. Like I feel like that's
yeah,
such a common thing to have, and I would love if there was. I mean, I know like modals are not necessarily beloved in many ways, but I feel
yeah,
like that's for that kind of thing. Maybe it's a reasonable path. I think for now, like I've seen. I recently saw a talk at some. There was a web AI summit that I went to recently, where um, so there were 2 speakers that were working on a very big CMS in Japan. I don't recall the name, but they had built something like this for for that CMS that helps, that proposes different titles and proposes different other elements for the content. And
yep,
and I thought, well, this kind of thing could be like an abstract UI component, because it's needed in so many content assistant scenarios where you have to pick, you need to be able to see 3 options next to each other, let's say, plus potentially the one you already populated if you want to have it revised by AI,
yeah.
and then use to make a good decision. I mean, definitely people can build this themselves, but I feel like this is such a recurring thing that it would be good to have a UI component for that.
So what you're basically saying is you have the functionality of your AI services plugin, which, in my opinion, should be a core thing inside of WordPress. And I really hope you work toward that end to get it in. 'Cause I think you have some sway there. So
My goal is definitely to make this should become an infrastructure, general infrastructure that, at the very least, a canonical plugin, I hope,
yep.
um, but ideally long term in core.
I think that should be the goal if I'm really honest. But then I also hear you say, as we're building these types of things, we have decisions to make in the UI that present certain things as we're bound to have more and more. I think that makes perfect sense. Yeah, and like I said, when I introduced this topic, this is one I'm very excited about, because what I think it does, it makes WordPress shift from whatever trajectory we were on into, let's try to make this thing we're using to create our content and manage our content, and um, take the manage part very light here. I think there's a lot that we need to improve on that part as well. But if we start approaching all the things we're adding to it from a structural, let's do it foundational, smart, in a way that other folks can just easily build on top of it, I really like the approach, to see that as the default approach for anything being added. So if we're adding this feature, great, but what is it part of? What is the bigger thing here? And maybe we finish building that layer first before we actually do the implementation of that feature, because we need that layer. And I know, for instance, on Project Gutenberg, a lot of that stuff is already being done in that fashion, but I'd like to see it a lot of outside of Gutenberg as well.
Yeah, completely agree. That's one of my favorite topics outside of performance and of AI, is like just standardization of
Yeah.
of certain things, like and
it's boring as
blocks.
hell. But
Yeah, I like it.
I
blocks,
do too.
blocks, and I mean, blocks are doing a good have been doing a lot on that end, to make
Mhm.
certain things more standardized. Like for instance, how blocks use like assets like JavaScript and CSS, and and full site editing, of course, emphasizes that even more, because now blocks are used for pretty much everything. So
Yep.
that makes it even better. But then there are still aspects of content management that are not part of blocks, and those are still, I feel, lacking in WordPress. And like
Yep.
for instance, I don't know, one of the things that always comes to mind for me is like form plugins. There are tons of
Yep.
form plugins. Where do they
Form.
send the data? How do they send the data? Like, there's
Yep.
no core API that provides any kind of foundation to be like, here is how you should accept form submissions to the backend,
Yep.
and then pipe them through to an email notification or whatever third party
Every
membership,
single
whatever
plugin.
newsletter service. Yeah.
Yeah. Every single form plugin that does any type of form needs this. They have it.
Right.
They built it
Right.
in. It's such a shame that this is not a canonical thing again. No, I agree. I think we're on the same page here. Um,
But I mean, I want to go back to the question you asked me though before about the coding assistance.
yeah. Yep.
Um, I think one of the ideas that I've thought about a lot is, well, actually, it goes back to standardization too. Because we don't have standards for many things in WordPress core, plugins do everything completely arbitrarily. Like many things, they have to build their own. So
Mhm.
then form plugin A works completely different from form plugin B. SEO plugin A works completely different from SEO plugin B, and that goes for every niche.
Yep.
Um, and you cannot reasonably migrate from one plugin to another. Like, the WordPress has a serious vendor lock-in problem, I think, and um, as soon as you start using one plugin and you use it for a while, you cannot never get away from it unless you call a developer to do it for you.
Yep.
And that also is a concern from us looking at performance, because we sometimes, like, we have been exploring ways to, how can we assess performance of plugins, and how can we recommend alternatives, which is another great point for where I could be helpful. But then the last thing that all of this always gets stuck is how do you even migrate? Like, if, let's say, we found this great plugin that you could replace this plugin with,
Yeah. Yeah.
how do you even migrate? Like, you can't. Um,
No.
and there, um, I mean, this is maybe a crazy idea, but I thought about a lot. Like, if you could give if you could train like an AI model with the code bases of tons of WordPress plugins, maybe all,
In the same
um,
niche or all, yeah, yeah.
yeah,
Yeah.
and
I
then
think I know
you
where you're
would
going.
learn AI. Yeah, AI models. The AI model would kind of learn the database structure of WordPress. I mean, that I'm sure it already has a lot of that, even with the default models we use today. But then it would learn how each plugin kind of stores things in the WordPress database, and and then my dream here is that you could be like, okay, give me a plugin that give me a code snippet that migrates my data from form plugin A to form plugin B,
Yeah,
and
yeah,
AI generates the code. Because, and I think when I think about it, this is like, I mean, we're talking about gigantic amounts of data here that AI needs to consume to make it happen. But I think it's possible, and it's also a task where I feel like AI is perfect for it, because it's not difficult. Like, as a developer, you can easily figure it out. It's just tedious, and you won't be able to do this for 60,000 plugin combinations.
exactly. It's time consuming. Um, as you were explaining this example, there's another one that I thought of. If it has access to all the plugins, and WordPress itself, including the a proper full understanding of APIs, database schemas, and all that stuff, you can actually ask it to say, "Look, what are the areas where we should standardize? Like, what is everybody using?"
Right. That's it. Yeah. That's a good point.
You
So
can ask
basically,
it to analyze all the different methods. You can ask it to analyze it proper and say, come with a recommendation, highlight the points of where there's no question, and then additionally highlight the elements of where we need further research and all that. If you're adding all of this into an LLM, my word, there's a lot of
yeah.
opportunity there.
Yep. I think we need some gigantic plugin code base AI model
Yeah,
that would help with so many things. Like, but yeah, like,
automate.
I mean, what you just said, maybe, I don't know if that's what you're referring to. Like, for example, going back to form plugin, like, AI would be able to tell us X% of form plugins store submissions in a custom post type, X% of form plugins store it in a database table, X% of do something else,
Exactly.
like,
Yeah, yeah. But also then standardize. Hell, you can have the AI reach out to all the plugin builders and say, "Look, we're standardizing this way. This is the snippet you would need to add to migrate script and all that." I mean, heck, we can do. Oh man,
directly in the code editor, of course.
yeah, yeah, yeah.
Also, yeah.
I mean, we're just about an hour in this conversation, but I think we just added the potential for what are we? What else can we start standardizing? That's at least another hour. Um, yeah. I mean, the future is bright, no matter what's going on left and right. But I think the future is bright in terms of all the opportunities that we have ahead of us to come with a more complete, more um, more versatile, more standardized, more smarter CMS. I think we're just touching the surface here with what we currently have available, and an understanding of what AI can do for us. Um, One last question for you, if I may.
Mhm.
You like performance, you like AI. Do you see a bridge between the two at one point?
Um, I think, um, definitely a few ideas there. I think I think AI could be helpful in the future, or well, even today, if someone just tried to build it. um, but in terms of trying to find performance problems on your own website, so you could have kind of an AI performance assistant. I think there are definitely products out there that have started doing this kind of stuff. Um, but for instance, like, we've started playing around, like, not nothing serious really, but we started exploring, like, how could we first of all use AI to enhance the output of tools like Lighthouse or PageSpeed Insights.
Yeah.
Um, because some of the explanations gives are for once they are hard to explain they're hard to understand for non-technical users. So that's where I could be helping with. But
Yep.
even more important, if you add these tools do not have WordPress context. So if you had a WordPress plugin running that runs those things and kind of combines WordPress specific insights with the tools, then AI could, I think, make a lot more sense of it and explain that towards the end user. Like, I don't know, here's this render blocking script. That itself is what the tools give you, but it's not necessarily very helpful. But then you could be like, okay, this comes from this plugin here, and maybe you could have like a end user mode and a developer mode. For the developer mode, there would be like, here's this code snippet to fix this. So this is only enqueued when it's actually needed, or whatever fix is appropriate for the situation.
Yep.
And for the end user, I mean, you can't necessarily fix that automatically for them. Although you could even try doing that, but at the very least, you could say, hey, this plugin does this and this. I always go very blunt and say, complain to their support.
Yeah. That's a good start. I think there's even an extra layer. So there's a whole bunch of stuff that I happen to fix on many sites that I been asked to make faster or help scale, or however you want to phrase it. There's a few default things that I just check for because those are things that slow the site down. Slow queries is a good example. But one that I still surprisingly see a lot is the license check for a premium plugin happening on every single page load. Doesn't really make a lot of sense if that page load is 100,000 requests per day. And things like that are just too default to ignore in these types of settings, I think.
Right.
You can check whichever outgoing call is being made. If that's one that's on page load, you can measure that, and you can then say, look, hey, buddy, maybe you want to cache that a little bit here and there. Transient, maybe, or whatever solution you want to do. But it doesn't make a lot of sense to do that on every page load, especially if the where you the thing you're querying is slow in response.
Right.
There's a lot of stuff you could actually do.
Yeah, and then the other thing about performance in AI goes immediately back to that idea of a massive plugin AI database with the code base awareness and stuff. Like AI could, for example, I could then we could also then feed it the Crux data and be like or HTTP archive data and say that this behavior in this plugin likely contributes to this kind of metric in the field, like in a positive or negative way, and assess performance of plugins at scale. There's a lot of opportunity there.
I think you just added a completely new project to your list of things to explore, Mr. Arntz.
I mean, all of this stuff is kind of things that we've been thinking about, but they are also huge lifts to get started and they take a lot of work to get done. But I think there's definitely an opportunity here. So
I think so too. I think I think it's inevitable that we end up thinking about solving our problems in such a fashion where the actual solutions we're looking for are so huge or so diverse or whatever, that you end up going, at what point are we, should we mandate ourselves to force to use AI first to then have the mundane stuff done for us, and then come up with a list of things to then actually start fixing? I think it's inevitable that we end up that way. And as I say the word inevitable, I'm immediately reminded of the Matrix. I don't know if we should, but the sound of inevitability is the quote of no, but yeah, I agree with you. There's a big task ahead of us that at one point we're going to start saying, yes, we're going to be serious about this. We need to move forward with this.
And then,
Yeah.
I mean, I don't want to open another topic, but I'm still going to do it. Like just AI and open source. How you do all of this in an open sourcey way?
Yeah, yeah. Well, there are
Can you
elements
like
that are open source, so you'd start there, I guess.
definitely, and but like, I mean, I would love to see if someone built this or established this AI, trained an AI model with all this data. It would be great to have this, make this available open source
Yep.
somewhere, so that then all those, I mean, we probably talked about 3 different ideas on what to do with that now, but there are probably hundreds.
Oh,
So everybody should be able to do this kind of thing.
yeah, yeah, yeah.
um, yeah. And
Well,
I'm in that sense also very excited about AI kind of becoming more available on device and on the web, because that way it doesn't require a cloud-based provider.
yep.
It's kind of something that's just starting right now. I feel like it's
Yeah, Apple
becoming a
AI.
little more popular.
Yep. Yeah, like I said, and I'll repeat, the future is bright. Um,
Yeah,
there's just a lot of stuff to do, but I think we'll end up with this is going to sound very, very big and very corny, but I think we'll end up with a better world if we start thinking in terms of how do we create that better world with the tools that we have available to us to do the mundane stuff. I think that, you know,
exactly.
just starting with that is probably the best thing we have ahead of us. I want to thank you for a wonderful conversation. I think we touched at least uh, two topics that I hold dear, and as you as well.
Yep.
I think anybody who's listening to this and wants to really start paying attention to how we do AI and what we can do with it, and maybe even has ideas, Felix, where can they find you?
My website is felix-arntz.me, and otherwise you can find me in pretty much all the socials under my full name, Felix Arntz, except on WordPress.org. I am Flixos90,
Yeah,
FLIXOS90, which I always say this is. I always say this is my this. I believe I only have this weird username because it was the oldest platform that I created an account for when I was not yet a serious person.
yeah. I, a last thing to note on that, and then um, I'll let you go. But I think WordPress.org should allow a change of username once, because I know a lot of people with usernames like this. Um, Swiss Spidey, Ocean 90, just to
Yeah.
just to name a few. Um,
But maybe it's also fun. Maybe it's also fun to keep those weird usernames around.
sure, the pros and cons, pros and cons. Um,
Definitely, definitely.
Either way, thank you so much for a lovely conversation.
Yeah, thanks for having me. This was fun.